Do you want your kids to be more resilient, get a little grit? Well, that's what we're diving into today. Welcome to It's Going to Be Okay with Dr. Roseann, and we're talking about nurturing emotional intelligence in kids today. Today in our stress world, our world full of anxiety, we sort of kind of left emotional intelligence by the wayside. Yeah, we have. Yeah, you say we're talking about emotions, but we're talking about stress, we're talking about worry, we're talking about anxiety only. In order for kids to really be resilient, develop grit, they need coping skills. And that comes from experiencing a range of emotions and learning how to identify and tolerate them. And guess what? Parents have the power to really help their children do this better than every person on the planet, whether you're going to a trained therapist or have the power to really help their children do this better than, or you're thinking your teacher's going to help or they're somehow just going to get this through osmosis. No, parents really are the best people in teaching that. So of course it starts with you, and you need to self-regulate. Remember, 80% awesome. Really showing them, modeling coping skills, showing them what stress is like, not hiding it, but also really taking those, what we call metacognitive strategies, those things we say inside, the way we problem solve, and putting it outside. So let's help understand what is emotional intelligence, right? So it's something that's, a term you've heard. It's been around probably 20 years. Howard Gardner talked a lot about, he's a scientist that talked a lot about different kinds of emotional intelligences, and there are. But when we're talking about emotional intelligence, it's really, what's your empathy quotient? How do you see and understand not just yourself and how you tolerate and experience things, but what's your worry and understanding and thoughts about other people, right? Do you have that ability to think outside of yourself? Now, young kids and kids in general are egocentric, right? They are learning, they're developing things. They're not just born with it. Now, some kids really have a high EQ and you kind of know it, My John Carlo, like he came out like a 57-year-old man and, would say these very Buddhist enlightened things. And I definitely was a very emotionally tuned in person. My whole life, he's very different from me. My whole life, I could feel things from others, and I was just very empathetic. Um, and yet we both share a real high integrity and a sense of right or wrong. He doesn't care about it in the same way. He's like, yeah, they're doing the wrong thing, whatever. Where I would, even as a young child, would, march up to somebody and be like, what are you doing? One of the famous things is like, my sister is 3 years older than me, and I was 5 and she was 8, and some kid came up to her and told her she was sexy, and I was like incensed, and I beat the bejesus out of him. Very culturally accepted in Italian family. My mother was like, fatta buona, which means good job. But I remember being like, how dare this kid say this to her? And there was some rigmarole, like where he was bothering her or something like that, and his parents didn't say anything. And I thought, what? You're 8 years old. You don't say that. But that emotional component, that wasn't a highly emotional thing, intelligent thing to do, to beat that poor kid up. But culturally, that was part of what, was doing. Anybody who's, raised in the 70s by Italian parents knows exactly, greater New York area, you would have been high-fived. We don't want to do that, right? But understanding, feeling things that other people feel, having a real awareness outside of yourself, this is really part of emotional intelligence. And we want our kids to see what other people are feeling. That is a really important skill to develop, and something that is not happening as we're having less face-to-face interactions, less phone calls. It develops by understanding body language through direct experiences, by watching others. And we want our kids to really have empathy, and this is part of social skills, right? And parents sometimes, they not sometimes, they overvalue grades over everything else. And our best leaders have high empathy. Who doesn't want Oprah to be president? I mean, come on. She's such an empathetic leader. She's such a balance of power and heart. And when we think about our best bosses, right? Think about your best bosses. I recently just I had to add some new staff, and I just got the most lovely message from one of my new employees. And she's in her 50s, and she said, I have never been welcomed like this in a place that's so caring. And I was like, my God, I just love that kind of stuff. Plus, I love grateful language. But, when you think about great bosses, they get you, they treat you with respect, and they really are empathetic, right? They're also mentors, right? They're not micromanagers. And so we want to help us develop that in kids. How do we do that? One, we teach them to label feelings, a range of feelings beyond the words of angry and stressed and mad, right? We want them to, really understand it themselves and connect to it, connect to the sensations. How do you do that? One, you can, at every age, people should have like one of those, Google emotions faces, right? And have one of those, whether it's a wheel or all the different faces with the names of the emotions. If you have young children, you want to read books about it, you want to help them to identify. But when it's themselves, right, you also want to say, wow, it sounds like you're very upset. I'm so sorry your goldfish died. I'm so sad. And get them to experience it. You also can do things like put your hand on the place on your body where you feel it the most. Like, you really want to slow down and get them to connect. You also want to use the words that have feeling words. So those same words with those faces, are you using them in your house? Are you just like math, science, put your put your homework away? This can't be your only discussion. You're really shortchanging your child's development. And I know we live busy lives, but it's important to do these kinds of things because emotional development is what they're going to need their whole lives, right? You want them to pick a great partner in life. You want them to pick a job that feels good to them. And they're not going to get there if they're not self aware and they're self-regulating. And emotional development is the second tier. The first part is emotional control, right? Like, we want to self-regulate and we build on that, right? And I know it's much harder with our neurodivergent kids or kids that have, emotional regulation issues, whether it's because they're dealing with clinical issues or something else is going on. But we want to teach that self-awareness. We want to really support self-regulation. Go back and listen to that whole self-regulation series. Honestly, it's some of the finest work I've ever done. I couldn't be more proud of it. I'm going to be writing my next book about self-regulation. You're going to hear a lot more about it, and we need to really talk about it. So, what do we do when our kid is struggling with emotional intelligence, right? Okay, so let's review it. One, we want to teach self-regulation first. So if we have a kid that's very impulsive, what are you going to do, right? Go back and listen to the series, whether it's getting clinical support, you're doing different types of activities, exercise is probably one of the number one things you can do if you have a dysregulated kid, nutrition, neurofeedback, all those other things. Those are, if you have a kid with clinical issues, we want to teach emotional language. We want to consistently support emotional development, talk about it, role model it, and really create the time for emotional discussions. Teenagers aren't going to just open up to you. They need to spend time with you, and it's through activities, right? Going and playing basketball, cooking together, the conversation opens up. You try to sit next to a grumpy teenager, they're not going to open up with you. And it's so critical when it comes to emotional intelligence in education settings. I'm worried about this. There was a big push, and now with such teacher shortages, we're not focusing as much on it. But you as a parent or a partner to a teacher, teachers are amazing. 90% of teachers really are spectacular. Shout out to all my teachers. A lot of teachers bring their kids to me. Um, you have to work with them, and they really have a lot of training in this. You can kind of role model some of the things, but in school we need to do more to support the social emotional development of kids, because kids are dysregulated. And it doesn't have to be as big of a thing. It can be integrated into school, it can be integrated into home. Are you reading books about emotions? How about listening to cool podcasts? How about listening to audiobooks? You can find ways in busy lives, but ultimately it's about connecting with your child, using emotional language, not avoiding really uncomfortable things, and helping to support them when they experience these range of emotions, and really supporting their coping skills. Because you can't avoid big emotions, but there is a range and kids should experience them. So, welcome to having an emotionally savvy family ecosystem. You got this. You can do this. And your kid and their kids are going to be better off because of all the wonderful things you're doing.